Okay, I'm going to just talk for a little bit about some of the philosophical aspects of what we just did, which was that 3-layer meditation. Think about how we can use this in a practical sense in our life, but also as a way of organizing how we think about meditation. Most of meditation that we're familiar with, most indirect path kind of meditation, like mindfulness meditation, spends a lot of time attending to something in the first layer. The first layer is, again, activated sensory experience. So, for instance, if you were to focus on your breath, you would notice where it was cool, or where there was vibration, or where there was shape, or there was pressure. All of those are activated sensory experiences. Some of them may be very quiet, but they are the activation of your sensory experience. And you are practicing staying with it, being present with it, and accepting it. Now, most of our everyday normal mind that is not in meditation is sort of touching on the layer one. Like it's definitely interacting with layer one. We see the walls and we run into things, right? And we're having images and sounds in our head. So it's our normal everyday experience is made up of layer one, and meditation is just teaching us a different interaction with layer one. So we live our lives mainly in what is loud, what is noisy, what is bright, what is painful or pleasurable, right? What is loud, what is noticeable. And that makes sense. That's how our attentional system has been designed, to notice the things that are more prominent. Right? And loudness, of course, is subjective. I can't hear things that a dog can hear, so that's part of my subjective experience. But more than that, there's going to be things that just don't pop up for me. Like I just don't even notice. Physical attraction is a very simple way to get this. You walk down a street, you're attracted to certain people, you're not attracted to certain people. You might notice that, right? You and I may be attracted to different people, so we'll have different attentional grabs. Very simple way of putting it. Or you may have had something bad happen to you in an alley once, and I grew up in an alley. I don't know. I like alleys. So again, I walk past an alley, it will have different attentional experiences. Different things will be loud. Different things will have a loud sensory quality. But nonetheless, all of us spend most of our time rapidly moving our attention between the loudest things in our environment. Every now and then we'll be willful and say, I gotta attend to this loud thing and not this loud thing, and this loud thing's annoying, I'm gonna try, right? So we can do some willful concentration in our everyday life, but usually that's a movement between loud things, right? It's a movement between noticeable things. We're saying, I'm going to try and restrict my attention to this important set of sensations, as opposed to all these other sensations. So that's the difference between concentration in our everyday life and meditative concentration. Now, sometimes concentration in our everyday life, when we really get into a flow or a performance, can become meditative. But generally, when we sit down to work or sit down to concentrate on something, we are not in a meditative state. We're still interacting with the thing we're concentrating with in a non-accepting way. Right? We're using it to get somewhere else, to improve it, to fix it, to judge it. So most of mindfulness meditation is a practice of attending to layer one in a new way. It's attending to layer one, not by according to what is loud, first of all, especially when you're doing a concentration exercise, like for instance, focusing on your breath. You're starting to practice just choosing a particular sensation, whether it's loud or not, and using your concentration to stay with it. And then you're attending to it with acceptance. You're letting go of judgment. You're letting go of trying to improve it or fix it. You're letting go of analyzing it or thinking about it. All of those things are very hard to let go of. Those are so automatic for all of us, right? We all agree with that. Those are very automatic, immediately, whatever we're interacting with. And you can notice this if you're just focusing on your breath. You can notice how much analysis your mind wants to do, how much judgment your mind wants to do, how much adjustment your mind wants to do, fixing things. Those are just the automatic habits. And so we're practicing letting go of those. And we practice that by dropping as close as we can into the sensory experience, to what's actually happening in layer one, at the base level, the foundational level. It's heat, it's vibration, it's color. Letting go of good and bad and just noticing the experience. So most of meditation then is picking some part of layer one, some part that is usually closer to rest, a little bit more pleasant, not as loud, sort of something in the moderate space, but something that we can notice and see and or experience, and concentrating on it and accepting. Now, as we get more advanced, I shouldn't say that. One other way of working with this, I do think it's I think there's a useful way of moving in this hierarchical way, moving from concentration to letting your mind freely move through sensory experience. So you do the feel, see, hear, feel, right? And allowing your attention to, love you, Cassiel, allowing your attention to float to the loud things as it once now, but now you are practicing acceptance with those things. So then you can open your space to the one way of thinking of that is we practice on little bits of layer one to see what it's like to interact with layer one in an accepting way. And then as we get better at that, we start to open our attention to broader and broader swaths of layer one. That is saying, we're noticing all of layer one experience until eventually we can just walk through our daily life in a layer one experience, like really seeing all our senses, the colors, the lights, the thoughts, the feelings, and be sort of in a state of equanimity with respect to all of it. And obviously we move through stages when we do that. You know, we might need to work with difficult emotions first. So we might have meditations where we really sit with our difficult emotions to see what challenges arise when we try to accept those, or physical pain, or other people's social experience, like we sit in a group. These are areas that are of loud experience that are particularly hooky. They hook us, and particularly magnetic, particularly hard to interact with in an accepting state. So we might focus on those. And as we start to see where all our, we start to learn the map of our own triggers, and practice acceptance with all those, we can move our attention into a wider and wider space until ultimately, yes, we can do that see, hear, feel. We can notice anything, any arising, any movement of our attention. And when our eyes land there, we go, yes, that is what is. Ah, yes, that is what is. Ah, yes, that is what is. Now I'm adding words to it, and you can use those words at the beginning, but ultimately it's going to be wordless. It's going to be an attitude, an experience of equanimity, acceptance, being with what is in the layer one space. So layer two is our rest states. So our sensory apparatus is attuned to the loud things and is always sending us information about when it's being activated. So our eyes are constantly saying, oh, all these cells in the eye are being activated by the light coming off of that and the light coming off of that, the different wavelengths. The nervous system in my body is being activated by the chair against me. We have different feel sensations. We have pain and itching and nausea sensations, and we have contact sensations. These are all giving us different pieces of information when they're activated by the world. Same thing with auditory, obviously. And that, but there are also most of our nervous system. It wouldn't make sense. In fact, we would lose our mind if our whole nervous system, it was activated all at once. Right? It was sort of like, you can't hear my words if all the sounds, if everyone were talking at once. If every cilia in your ear were activated, then you would just hear a white noise, right? A very loud white noise. You wouldn't be able to separate anything out. So most of our nervous system, in order to sense anything in the world, most of our nervous system has to be in a waiting state, in a ground state, let's call it, or a rest state. It's just waiting to be activated so that when it is, it's like, hey, something happened over here. And then it'll go back to rest after that something that's happened goes away. Now, again, biologically and culturally, we are trained for very good reasons to attend to the things that are saying, hey, there's something happening here, right? Because that's how we can be safe in our environment, is to notice when things are happening. But that means that we are not attuned to the fact almost all the time that there are all these aspects of our nervous system that are at rest. And they're at peace is another way of putting it. They're quiet. They're just in a state of waiting. Now, in a world where we are overstimulated, I think we can say that without having to give much argument for it. A world in which our nervous system is overstimulated because of the way it works, it's very, very useful to be able to tune into the aspect of your nervous system that's at rest. And again, this is a part of you. I'm separating them out. Sometimes it's not separated out. This is a part of your normal mindfulness meditation. In many ways, what we're doing is getting so comfortable with the activated state. We get so equanimous with what's happening in the activated states that we're now no longer being dragged around by them. So we can just sink down and start to notice the rest states automatically. And that's what will happen in a deep concentrated state. You'll just start automatically dropping into rest states. But there's a shortcut, and that's by actually turning your attention to the rest states from the beginning. This is a very powerful technique for increasing your concentration, increasing the well-being in your body, and getting acceptance for free. It's very easy to accept rest states. It's not perfectly easy, especially under certain circumstances, but if you can directly experience the rest state, you're generally going to have you're going to have a more quiet response to a rest state. Right? There's not stuff there that's going to trigger you. That's one way to put it, right? Your rest state doesn't have any of the stories in it. Now, that's not true for all of us. That there could be a possibility of a rest state being triggering for somebody, but for the most part, you should be able to find rest states that immediately cause calming in the rest of the system. Really important with rest states to know that when as I've said many times in these classes, where your attention is to create your experience, and when your attention is actually on a rest state for a continual period of time, then the mind and the rest of the nervous system goes, oh, I haven't looked at anything loud for a while. It must mean things are going pretty good. And it starts to calm down. It starts to relax. It starts to ease into an overall rest state. That is, rest spreads. Okay. So when you attend to rest, it tends to spread through the rest of your system. When you start to get a sense of how rest is bigger than noise, that is, how rest is a bigger part of your sensory experience than the activated states, then that changes the way you move through your world. It changes how your body feels, right? Because you start to realize that you're never very far away from being in a restful, peaceful state, sensory state, right? I'm not even going any deeper than that. There's a restful, peaceful sensory state available in your body all the time. Now, again, this is harder to concentrate on because we aren't drawn to it naturally. So at first that may not feel that way at all. But the practice of meditation, even when you're working on layer 1, is to help you get more access to layer 2. But you can also directly focus on layer 2. And it's useful just to think of these as ground states or as quiet states as you can access. If you can't access a real ground state, then you go to the quietest one you can access. And that's why focusing on the breath is a good way of focusing on layer 1, because the breath is very quiet for most of us some of the time, place to focus, even though it's not really a rest state. What we focus on, like when you're focusing on the coolness in your nostrils, that's an activated state, but you're getting close to the rest states because there's pauses and there's gaps and there's silences in between, right? So even when we can't focus directly on rest states, we're moving that direction when we do a lot of our layer 1 meditation. But you can directly try to find these ground states in your body. And there's more than I've described. But anywhere you have a nervous system, anywhere you have nerves, right, there's a possibility of a ground state there. Like, what is that nervous system experience like when nothing's really going on? So there is not 0 states, right? There's still something, like there's still something there. Right? And that's the thing that makes rest states so powerful, because there's still something there, allows you to focus on it, right? It gives you something to grab onto. It's just a very little thing, right? So the simplest one for me, the one that's been most powerful for me, is the auditory one. There's an ocean wash in your ears you can hear. It has nothing to do with what's going on in your environment. It's just the cilia in your ears just waiting. They're just sitting there waiting. They're just hearing the air, you could say it that's way, right? They're just hearing air in your ears. And that is as lowest state as they get to until they're dead. Right. So while they're alive, while they're active, while they're not broken, they are just here in that state. And it also can induce a kind of sense of gratefulness when you really think of it properly. You're like, oh, look at all this nervous system I've got. And look how it's just sitting here working, waiting, patiently waiting. And I look how restful it is, right? I get a sense of gratefulness. Maybe that doesn't come automatically, but a sense of gratefulness in tuning in to the parts of the nervous system that are just alertly restful, right? Alertly restful. So I encourage rest states for people. It really builds your concentration really quickly and powerfully. And it also causes real benefit and resource in the body. All right, then finally, our third layer, we'll call them 0 states today, just to keep it in the pattern: activated states, ground states, 0 states. In many ways, this is the direct path part of meditation. So when meditation is asking you to directly go to the truth with a capital T, directly see the self with a capital S, directly let go of the entire world, surrender, when it's asking you directly to go directly the truth, one thing that's really being asked of you is to let go of the sensory world. By letting go, again, repeat this as many times as I can, we're not getting rid of or pushing away or rejecting. We're just stop holding on to it. So we have an immediate grabbiness towards sensory life. And that's how we start building up the whole story. So we have a big grabbiness for story, but it begins with our grabbiness towards the sensory life. And this is one of the most explicable ways of talking about what a direct path type of focus is. One way of thinking about this is we are turning our attention, it's almost as if we're reversing our attention away from the world. But it can be more useful to use these proxies for what that is. So we can start by, for instance, the space around your body. Very useful to go, what does it feel like 3 feet behind my head? And not using your mind to answer the question, not doing it, not imagining you're a little insect. No, like, what does it actually feel like? And you're like, oh, there's no feeling there. And what's happened now is your attention, which is this little light bulb, little like flashlight, is that scans through reality, is now suddenly like pointing into the emptiness, into the dark. Another one that I found really useful in my early days was like imagining like there's a dresser right over here and just going, what does it feel like to be that dresser? Now, again, that's sort of an imaginative experience, but you're not imagining anything, right? There's nothing it feels like to be that dresser, right? Like it's just perfectly calm, perfectly peaceful, perfectly, like there's no point of view there. So I can go through many examples, but you can use, there's an infinite number of examples of ways. These are little pointers, right? Little ways of pointing to what it is to have your attention focused on nothing. And this is the hardest thing, right? So we turn our attention, we start to concentrate on like on our breath. Like, okay, this is hard because I'm used to sending my attention around focusing on a million things, but now I'm just going to focus it on one thing, right? And it's one kind of quiet thing. And then we focus on rest, which I'm going to focus now my attention on one thing, but it's one very quiet thing. It's as quiet as a thing can get while being in the world. And then eventually you can just keep doing that. And eventually you'll start to get so quiet and peaceful that your attention no longer has to focus on anything in sensory experience. It can now just start to live in. So when we focus on zero states, what we're really allowing ourselves to do is get into the ground state of our whole experience, which is awareness. Awareness is not a sensory experience. Sensory experience arises in awareness. We turn our attention to zero states. What we're doing is saying, hey, I want to look at what this is all made of. And I need to clear out all the clutter that's on top of it to experience what it's all made of. And the clutter is all our sensory experience at first. Now, ultimately, we can see that the awareness and the sensory experience are made up of each other, but we have to sort of disentangle, most of us have to disentangle them first. I understand we're starting to talk in a more, this is less concrete than the other stuff. But this is a useful way to think about it. Everything is arising in awareness. What is awareness? What is it like to experience awareness? What is it like to be in contact with awareness? Well, you can have it at any time, but a useful way is to get so quiet in your sensory experience that there's nothing left but awareness. And then you'll get the experience of what you are. The ways, and so one way in is this idea of zero states. Can I hold my attention on something that has nothing in it, right? Can I feel the space all around my body, all the way out into the world? Can I feel that? I'm just going to keep turning my attention to that lack of feeling, really, to that zero state. And then what I'll be finding there is just awareness. Now, this is not the only way to do this, but this is a useful way to think about what we are doing. And whatever meditation you do, you can think about where it fits in layer 1, layer 2, or layer 3. And it can maybe give you a little bit of insight of why the practice is working that way. So when, for instance, I'm going to finish up here, the classic direct path teaching, who am I? Who am I? That practice, the direct path, is asking you to answer that question, but not with the mind. Right? It's saying directly encounter yourself. And so what happens? Well, the first start for those who first encounter that, your mind, you start using your mind and your senses to look around for yourself. So you search through layer 1, right? And you may even start to search through layer 2 as you're like, okay, it's none of these loud things. Maybe it's some of these quieter things. And you might be this instinct that getting quieter is the right direction. But what it's really asking you to do is to look into layer 3. It's saying, look through layer 1 and go, oh my God, there is no answer here, right? So I am a 0 state. You know, when the Buddhism tells you you're nothing, that's what this means. You're no thing. You're not a thing that arises in awareness, because you are awareness itself, whatever that is, right? You know, and awareness is just a word. So that doesn't really capture what you are either, but it gives us a way of talking about. Okay. So that's that. We might do that meditation a few more times over the next few weeks, start working with it. I'd love to hear how it works for anybody. And you know, it's a fairly difficult meditation if you're doing all 3 of those in one sit, but it's a good way of sort of organizing our thoughts about meditation. Thank you, Facebook, for stopping by. We're going to go into discussion here, which is only for those on Zoom. You're always welcome to come join us on Zoom. Reminder, this is a donation class. It's a by donation. Feel free to donate whatever feels appropriate for you. No donation is required. All donations are welcome. And I will see you next week. Much love.